Mendele Mocher Sforim, born Sholem Yankev Abramovich or S.J.Abramowitch, was a Jewish author and one of the founders of modern Yiddish and Hebrew literature. Youth. Mendele was born to a poor family in Kappel in Minsk Governorate. His father, Chaim Moishbroid, died shortly after Mendele became bar mitzvah. He studied in yeshiva in Slusk and Vilna until he was 17. During this time he was a day boarder under the system of tegessen, barely scraping by, and often hungry. Mendele next traveled extensively around Belarus, Ukraine and Lithuania at the mercy of an abusive beggar named Avram Kromoy. In 1854, Mendele settled in Kamets-Podilsky, where he got to know writer and poet Avram Gottlober, who helped him to understand secular culture, philosophy, literature, history, Russian and other languages. Early work. Mendele's first article, Letter on Education, appeared in 1857 in the first Hebrew newspaper, Hamajid. His mentor Gottlober submitted Mendele's school paper without Mendele's prior knowledge. At Berdichev in the Ukraine, where he lived in 1858 to 1869, he began to publish fiction both in Hebrew and Yiddish. Having offended the local powers with his satire, he left Berdichev to train as a rabbi at the relatively theologically liberal, government-sponsored rabbinical school in Zhytomyr, where he lived in 1869 to 1881, and became head of traditional school in Odessa in 1881. He lived in Odessa until his death in 1917, except for 2 years in Geneva, where he fled the government-inspired pogroms following the failed revolution of 1905. Ideology and later work. Soliptzan writes that in his early Yiddish narratives, Mendele wanted to be useful to his people rather than gain literary laurels. The Little Man and the unstaged 1869 drama Die Taxi both condemned the corruption by which religious taxes were diverted to benefit community leaders rather than the poor. This satiric tendency continued in Die Klatsche about a prince, a stand-in for the Jewish people, who is bewitched and becomes a much put-upon beast of burden, but maintains his moral superiority throughout his sufferings. His later work became more humane and less satiric, starting with Fishki and continuing with the unfinished Matos Benjamin Hashlishi, something of a Jewish Don Quixote. This was adapted for the Jüdische Kulturbund as a play in 1938 by Hermann Sinsheimer and performed there shortly after the Reichspogromnacht. As with Fishki, Mendele worked on and off for decades on his long novel Das Wunschfingerl. At least 2 versions preceded the final one. It is the story of a Maskell, that is, who a supporter of the Haskalah, like Mendele himself, who escapes a poor town, survives misery to obtain a secular education much like Mendele's own, but is driven by the pogroms of the 1880s from his dreams of universal brotherhood to one of Jewish nationalism. The first English translation, by Michael Wex, was published in 2003.